Well, let's get more now on how WikiLeaks gets its information and why it's posting it, whether or not it's bank documents or diplomatic cables from the U.S. State Department. CNN technology contributor and New Yorker magazine senior editor Nicholas Thompson joins us now from New York. Nicholas, there are so many different angles to this, and we have a lot to talk about. But first, let's just set up the scene. Where are WikiLeaks servers? Who's sending in the information? How are they doing it? And who's vetting all of this information?
Each one of those questions is complicated. They have, when the New Yorker looked at it very closely this summer, they have about 20 different servers scattered around the world. Late this summer, they moved their central server to this sort of underground nuclear vault in Sweden. They have apparently, however, shifted away from that. One of the issues is that when people know where their servers are, they're easier to attack. So they've moved their central hosting to, weirdly enough, Amazon.com. So some of it is hosted on Amazon servers in the U.S. and some in Amazon servers in Ireland. Other information is hosted in all sorts of other locations that we don't know about.
And who's sending in this information, and do they have a postal address to send it to?
Yeah, they do have a postal address that you can send it to. You can either send information through an electronic Dropbox, which is kind of like an email of some sort, or you can send it via mail to a postal address in Australia, and they have all sorts of information on how to be as secretive as you can while you do that. And there was a tutorial online that would help people understand the process and how to encrypt the material. Right now, WikiLeaks isn't accepting submissions because they say they have too much of a backlog.
Okay, and let's talk about the documents that are coming in and whether or not they're real. Does WikiLeaks have a staff of editors who are qualified to say, okay, this is a false document and this is a real document?
I mean, this is the most amazing thing about the organization is we don't know exactly how many people work for it and volunteer for it, but it's closer to a couple than it is to, you know, a dozen. When we looked at it carefully this summer at the New Yorker, there were like 5 people working on it. So Assange has a combination of volunteers who help him vet the material, but I think most of the really important calls about what gets published and how it's presented are made by him himself. So this is an organization making really tough decisions about which documents actually threaten the lives of individual people, and yet it's being made by this one guy.
Interesting. And let's talk about the issue of secrecy versus transparency. I mean, you could make the argument, and the U.S. government is making this argument, that diplomatic cables are meant to be confidential. So what deserves to be secret and what deserves to be exposed?
Well, this is a really hard question because a thought experiment is if you look at any of the individual stories that came out and think of them as though they were the one thing that came out, the one piece, every single one of them would be hailed as a great piece of reporting. If CNN broke the current information about U.S. skepticism about Zardari in Pakistan, everybody would think, oh my God, isn't it amazing they got that cable, that information, and ran that story. But at the same time, there's a whole set of different questions are raised when you have an entire document dump with every diplomatic cable there is, which weirdly then is going to create an incentive for diplomats to be much less open, to pass much less information around, and is going to have quite a negative effect on foreign policy overall.
And that's the argument that many governments are making over this. But what does this mean also, Nicholas, for just you and me, those of us who use Facebook, Google, who email all the time? I mean, can this have tentacles that go further?
It could. I mean, the principle that's set here is actually quite terrifying when you think about it as an individual. Right now, there are a lot of people who are saying, the U.S. government, it's, being treated to, it's the equivalent of the full body scan and, sort of cheering that along. But if you think what happened, so there's one sort of low-ranking guy in the Army who's an intelligent analyst. He kind of hacks into some databases. He gets some material. He goes maybe a little further than he was authorized to go. He takes all that stuff. He sends it to WikiLeaks. Now, imagine that somebody at Google did that, and they said, you know what? We want to sort of expose all the emails of all these journalists because there's some public interest in doing that. And so the guy at Google goes and gets all of my archived emails on Gmail or gets everything you've posted on Facebook and sends it to WikiLeaks, and then WikiLeaks posts it. I mean, the possible implications and the possible harm that can be done to individuals by other individuals is quite broad. So there are obviously vast benefits to this kind of exposure. There are obviously vast benefits to the ability to root out corruption. And there's also something quite scary about, Assange and a small team of people making incredibly important decisions about what, gets spread out to the world and what doesn't.